Hello, this is the Wingwing Z84 that we all know and love. This is my second one now. I got this about a year ago because I'd seen a thread on RC groups where people were using this as the basis of a long-distance endurance competition to see how far you could get one of these to fly in a single flight. And they were mostly using lithium-ion battery packs like this, so I made up one of these as well to use with it. And I thought I was going to show everybody how it's done, but it quickly became apparent that I wasn't going to break any of their records. I think some people were getting 100 kilometers plus flights with these, and in a 90-minute flight I was only getting about 72 for the most part. I wasn't really using the full capacity of the battery, so I could have gone a bit further, but yeah, it was obvious that I wasn't going to beat them, so I never made any video about it. And then about 6 months ago I got this one because I thought what I could do with this is make a comparison with the Wingwing, because they're both about the same wingspan to within a few centimeters, and also the same sort of wing area as well. And being the same size like that meant that I could use all the same components on them. And if all the components were the same and the battery was the same, that would make it a apples to apples comparison of just the frame type itself. So Wingwing versus, flying wing platform versus more conventional layout. So that's what I've done. I've used exactly the same flight controller, GPS, receiver, ESC, motor, prop. Servos are a little bit different, obviously, because you only got two on this one. Yeah, so that was about 6 months ago, but the reason I didn't make that video at the time was because when the Nano Talon arrived and I took it out of the box and weighed it, it was already heavier with nothing on it than the Wingwing was ready to fly, minus the battery, of course. So I thought, well, there's no point doing that test because we already know what the outcome's going to be. I also found that I didn't really like this plane a whole lot, and mostly it was due to the way that the linkages were all sort of overly ambitious in the way that they were trying to make it so that you could just clip the wings on and the tails would pop off. So it's good for packing down and making it into putting it into a backpack or something like that. But as a result of that, all the linkages were sloppy and the tail wasn't working properly. And I just found myself getting more and more annoyed with it. You can see I've changed the servos completely. I did this before I even flew it. It was so bad that I didn't even try and use the way that it came from, like the original design. I just put 4 servos in, little itty-bitty thumb-sized ones in the tail that I had were a perfect fit there. But still, yeah, it didn't really fly all that great, and I found myself doing more and more complaining about it than anything else. But I did take some video at the time. And the other day, Uncle Bruce made a video about this as well, and he was sort of complaining about some of the same things. So being reminded of that, I thought instead of just deleting all that video, I would at least upload a little bit of it to show you my thoughts on this plane for what it's worth now. I mean, this plane's been out for ages, so it's not like a new on the market review or anything. But anyway, I will now do this comparison since I'm doing it. So it's not going to be a comparison to find out which one is more efficient. It should be pretty clear just from the weight alone that the Wingwing will kick the ass of the Talon, I think. Otherwise I'm really wrong. In fact, I was so confident that the Wingwing would win this comfortably that I gave it a handicap by putting this camera sticking out into the airflow on the top, and I did not do that for the Nano Talon. And the reason is, I think part of this competition that those guys were doing is that it had to have HD recording or some kind of camera recording to prove that you did the trip or something like that. And it's pretty unreasonable to think that people would be doing this thing without a camera of some kind. And for the Wingwing, once you put the battery in there, there's just really no other place to put the camera except for on the top. Whereas in here, you could quite comfortably fit it inside there. So for that reason, I gave it a sort of I don't know if it's fair to call this a handicap or whether that's just sort of that sort of evens things up, because we have a lot more frontal area here like that, and it's just sort of being wasted unless you put a camera in the middle. But anyway, that's the reason I put the camera on. I wasn't powering the camera, I wasn't recording anything, it was just going along for the ride to get in the airflow and make this one a little less efficient.
This is how the Nano Talon arrived. It was pretty much completely assembled right out of the box, so all the plywood and the plastic little pieces like this were stuck in. It had the Velcro on here and a strap here, and all you really needed to do is clip it together and put in your servo and motor and adjust them and stuff. So that was pretty nice. The foam is EPP, but it's molded EPP, so the surface is nice and smooth. But this particular EPP, I think it might be the biodegradable one maybe, but I don't like it that much. It's a little bit too soft and flexy. On areas like this where you have a box structure, that's not a problem, but on a thin piece like the tailplane there, it gets a little bit flexy for my liking. And it just has a strange sort of a creaky, squeaky feeling as you handle it. It sort of creaks and makes noises, and I just don't really like it that much. On the other hand, the quality of the moulding of all the pieces was very impressive. They all fit perfectly into each other, and not just the foam into the foam, but the plastic parts fit into their little positions in the foam perfectly as well. It's very, very nicely made. One thing about the Nano talon that I was surprised to see was the size of the ailerons. They're freaking enormous. This is comparing them to the mini talon at the top here and Nano talon at the bottom. They're basically the same size, and they just look comically large on this much smaller plane. And I wouldn't be surprised if this, combined with the sloppiness in the linkages, is also contributing to a lot of people were saying that the plane's sort of wobbly and roll. And I think these ailerons could be half the size, and that might have actually improved that sort of wobbliness a bit.
So if I push it this way, I can get it to line up pretty much straight with the trailing edge, and I can go like that, and it's a good 4mm off. You just sort of put it whichever way you want. Now compare that with the Wingwing using a normal servo arrangement. You can push this away and it goes pretty much back to where it was every time. Pretty much. This ruddervator thing hardly moves on this side. That's the best I can do pitching down. And you can see that the whole tail plane itself is moving, sort of getting twisted and pulled. The left side one is, the left side one is marginally better, but I still don't like it much.
So that was a result of using 3 9-gram servos in the way that the kit is designed for, and I just really wasn't liking it. So before I even flew it, I changed to these servos here, and they fit into the tail quite nicely. And I think the overall weight was actually less than using 3 9-gram servos. So it was more work to put them in there, of course, but much better result overall.
That's more like it.
When I first started putting together my Wingwing for this, I found a lot of useful information on this page, so I'll put a link to this in the description. I didn't really use any of the same parts that he's using here, but it was nevertheless quite useful to get an idea of what total flying weight you should be aiming for and stuff. And one of the things that made me give up on trying to beat these other guys' records is that they're putting a lot more effort into it, like he's desoldered all the pins on the flight controller, and somehow he's using a heavier camera than me, and he also has a like telemetry module on board and a second UBEC, and he's still getting the same flying weight as I got, 430 grams I think he said somewhere for his latest version. So yeah, I was quite impressed that he managed to do that. Another thing that I found on here that was quite useful was his PID settings for the tuning for ArduPilot. I've always said that you shouldn't copy other people's PIDs because it's not going to be applicable to your plane, and I never have copied them until now. And the reason I copied them is because the auto-tune that ArduPilot does, it just didn't really work very well. It seemed like it was working at first, and I set the plane up, and the first 2 or 3 missions I did, I was watching it the whole time, and I'm glad that I did watch it because it would run perfectly fine for about 10-15 minutes or so, and then it would suddenly start porpoising a little bit, or fluttering, or whatever you want to call it, and it would just flutter more and more until it started pitching downward, and it couldn't recover the pitch, and it would have just slammed itself into the ground if I wasn't watching it. And I just couldn't get the auto-tune to solve that, so I just came in here and copied, I think it's somewhere, pitch to servo D and so on, some of those values there. I just copied them straight off this page, and since then I haven't had any issues with the tuning. And I think this is a known issue with Arduplane's auto-tune. It doesn't work very well on small flying wings, I think is the general consensus. Anyway, this guy's done quite a few flights somewhere down here. There's a whole list of them. And he has a 72-kilometer flight there. And I got just on 72 kilometers myself one time, I think, with my very first full-length mission that I tried, which is not surprising that we got the same result. But anyway, yeah, you might want to look at this page if you're interested in setting up this kind of a build. This is the ESC that I used for both of these builds. I discovered this V-Good brand on Banggood about a year ago, and I tried one of them out and they're pretty good, so I've been using them exclusively since then. Another reason is because I got this programming card, and the reason I got the programming card is so that I could change the cutoff voltage to be more suitable for lithium ion cells, which can go down to lower voltages. This VGood company makes a pretty good range of ESCs from 6 amps up to 100 amps, I think, and I probably could have got away with using the 6 amp ESC just purely considering the motor current, but the reason I went with the 12 amp is because this is the smallest one that has a switching BEC, and if I was using a linear BEC for like an hour, hour and a half or so in these endurance kind of competitions that these guys are doing, apparently you don't want to use a linear BEC because you're wasting too much electricity. At least that's what I read in the RC Group's forum, so I just went with that.
So the other components I used were an Omnibus F4 Pro, a BN220 GPS, nice little cheap ones, and FlySky X6B receiver. I used one of those because it has a voltage sensor input so that you can see the voltage on your radio controlled transmitter instead of having to have a proper telemetry module on board. By the way, this little plastic piece for the spar broke in one of the first few flights that I did, and I was a little surprised because I'll show you the video in a minute. It wasn't really much of a crash. I just sort of threw it and it didn't launch properly. So I was a bit surprised about that, and I broke this plastic thing that's supposed to clip under the front there to hold this on, and I just replaced it with a bit of tape, so that's fine. But yeah, a little surprising that it broke without too much of a heavy crash, and I've glued it and then it breaks again a few times, and I left it like this, and you might be thinking, well, that's not very good, but the fact of the matter is, see how it's sort of creaky? It's got all these creaky, squeaky noises, and the foam creaks and squeaks on itself. Anyway, yeah, it doesn't actually move a whole lot more than the one that's not broken. So if I hold the fuselage down on the bench and I move the wing a bit, you'll see that it's able to move a good 1, maybe 2 degrees even. And this is the side that's not broken. So yeah, I just really don't like the way... I mean, this construction's nice in that you can unclip the wings and clip them back in easily, but I would rather that it just didn't have this wobbliness. And I wouldn't be surprised if this is another contributing factor to the wobbliness and roll that a lot of people have been complaining about. They seem to have put it down to the fact that there's dihedral in the wings, because when they changed this so that there was no dihedral, a lot of the roll went away. But that could be because they've just made this joint here a lot stronger, because I think they probably would have put a straight spar through it perhaps, and that would have stopped this from wobbling so much. The motor that I'm using is an 1806 2300 kV with a 5045 prop. This is a motor that I had from my mini quads back in the day, and I think could have probably chosen a better one and a better prop for this purpose, but still, it did alright.
Whoa! What the? That shouldn't have happened. I didn't even have the motor on. Like, you can't blame that on torque roll because there was no torque. Oh, okay. You know, for such a small plane, it's a rather intimidating experience. This speed I'm at here feels really good, but if I go a little bit slower, it just sort of feels like my roll inputs go too far. Like you roll a bit and then you put the stick back to the middle and then it just keeps rolling. Then you have to put in some opposite roll to make it stay still. See that? It almost rolled over too far. And then when you let off the throttle, it just pitches way down. Overall, I can't say I'm liking it that much. Banging to the left. Oops, going up all of a sudden for some reason. Now return to the middle. That was okay that time. Turning to the right. Turns around. Now I want to level up. And now it wants to go to the left. Oh dear. I wonder if I should have just bought another Wingwing. Or two for this price, actually, I could have got, just about. Seems to need a lot of throttle just to cruise. Good speed though. Oops. Well, yeah, I can't say I'm too impressed with it, to be honest. I mean, I thought it would fly a bit better than that. I mean, there's practically no wind, so it doesn't have that excuse. But it does fly. I just don't think it's going to be anywhere near as efficient as the Wingwing. Not with the starting weight. And just from the amount of throttle that I'm having to use to get it to stay in a steady, like flat and level flight. Wow, it can go pretty slow. Yeah, not bad speed-wise. Man, it can turn on a dime. But without the rudder, it doesn't really turn much. I can't make up my mind whether it's a good glide slope or not. Sometimes it seems like it is, and sometimes it doesn't. Gotcha. Oh, it's not tuned right. That's what the wobble is. I didn't notice that until I let it glide close to me overhead like that. You can see that the ailerons are going like that, and it's not really sustaining a solid position. So this is the mission that I set for the planes to do, same mission for both planes of course, and I made it into a figure 8 rather than just doing a return to launch like circle around and round, because I wanted it to do left turns and right turns, and I also wanted it to have some sort of straight sections like this where it could go in a straight line. So this loop is, I think this 1.5 kilometers up there is showing the distance of one mission, and it gets, I think, about 600 or 700 meters away from my location at the furthest distance, so I could still kind of just see it. At least if I was watching it as it went away, I could see it. It's a little bit hard to locate if you don't know where it is, because you can't hear it. Both of these planes, you can't hear them at 600 meters away. But you can hear them when they come over the house, so I made this end of the mission come over the house so that I could sort of go inside the house and do other things for the hour and a half, at least for the Wingwing I was expecting an hour and a half, and I can sort of, if I have a window open, I can kind of hear it coming over every now and then just to reassure me that it hasn't crashed or something. And I had to do this test over 2 separate days. One reason is that I wanted to make sure that there was no wind, and you really only get that kind of situation quite early in the morning. And after the sun comes up, basically it gets too windy. At least that's how it's been here lately. But miraculously, we had 2 days in a row that were very nice, calm mornings, so I was able to do it on those 2 days. And the other reason why I couldn't do it in one day is because to charge this battery up again, at least at the settings that I wanted to do at 0.5 amp, it's just too slow. It took almost 8 hours to recharge it. So I just let it do maybe 4 or 5 circles and return to launch. It's probably not necessary actually, there's no wind really, so... Well, it doesn't know that there's no wind, does it? So, yeah, let's give it 4 or 5 circles and then we'll do the mission. Okay, it's been about 15, maybe 20 minutes now, and we're already down to 14.2, 14.0 at the moment, volts, and in the straight line section here, hopefully that's on your screen. Oh, I can see it, wow. There we go. Yeah, so it's already looking not as good as the Wingwing, not surprisingly.
And I had to leave the radio on like this here because when I turned it off, it went into return to launch. And I don't know why it did that, because I'm pretty sure I copied the settings for this off the Wingwing that was already set up to do this mission. And I checked yesterday night before I did this that failsafe long action was set to 0, which means that when it's in autonomous mode like the mission and you turn the radio off and it has a failsafe, it should just keep doing the mission. But anyway, I had the batteries charged fully up, so that's not going to be an issue. So what I'll do is I'll just let it run down until it's about 12 volts, maybe 12 volts in a straight line, let's say, and then I'll bring it into land.
Alright, so let's have a look at some of the results for the Nano talon. This is the barometer altitude, and I'm using this as a measurement of the start and finish times of the flight because you can see quite clearly where it goes up from 0 and down to 0 altitude. And in the middle it's stuck on 100 doing the mission. And the total flight time for the Nano talon was 61 minutes. And this is the temperature from the barometer, so it's about 21 or 20 to 21 degrees. Pretty comfortable for these batteries, so no problems there. The current was on average about 3 amps. This is a little bit zoomed in there, again 3 amps. It's interesting that the current went down slightly, even though it was, like if you look at the performance of the altitude and everything, nothing's changed on the altitude, but somehow the current went down a little bit. Interesting. This is the battery voltage. So as I showed you in that little clip of video there, I was kind of surprised to see how quickly it dropped off. I wasn't expecting that. So one of these markers here is 5 minutes, I think. Yeah. So within about 5 or 6 minutes it went from 12 volts, which was where I was intending to stop it. So about 7 minutes later it's already dropped to sort of 9.5ish. So to even this up, I did this the next day with the Wingwing as well. Didn't really want to do that because I want to keep using this battery for a long time. I didn't want to damage it. So this is a little bit more of a zoomed in. Yeah, so what is this? 12 volts there. That's about 7 minutes, I think it dropped 3 entire volts versus like the first part of the flight from 16 to 12. That took, what's that, 55 minutes to drop the first 4 volts. And then 7 minutes to drop the next 3 volts. So it really changes quite quickly there. You gotta watch out. This little bit here is the section that went below 10 volts. So this is the 2.5 volts per cell mark where these batteries are not supposed to be discharged below. So I was just sort of looking at how potentially damaged these cells might have been by that. But it's about a minute and a half, which is not terrible, and it goes down to 9.2. So I think this pack will be okay. This is the next minute and a half, and you can see that it's bounced back to 12 volts fairly quickly. So I'm not too worried that I've damaged this pack, even though I did this again the next day. It should be okay. This is the climb out at the beginning, and it's gaining 120 meters in about 1 minute. So that's about 2 meters per second at an average current of 4 amps, which is not too bad. And this is the glide at the end, so this is with the motor off, and you could consider this to be the sink rate, I think. And I think I calculated this at 1.4 meters per second descending. This is the number of satellites, 18 on average throughout the mission. Ground speed was on average 15 meters per second, which is around 54 kilometers per hour. And you can see it's starting to sink or slow down a little bit at the end there. And this is a zoomed in section. I'm just sort of clipping off the beginning and the end here in this graph. So you can see a little bit clearer that it was about 16 at the beginning and it's gone to more like about 13 at the end. This is again a little bit more zoomed in. This is at the beginning, average of 17 when you zoom in to this point. And at the end an average of 13 meters per second. By the way, every 2 bumps that you see in this graph is 1 circuit. I think these bumps are the short leg of the mission at each end where it turned to face, would have been going north, at that point, and I think the wind must have been going north on that day because it got a little bit faster. So the actual airspeed would be something more like about 16, I think, at this point. Now, the observant viewers out there may have noticed in that little clip of the chase cam footage that I showed you from the mini quad following the plane, it's listing to the left a little bit constantly the whole way along. It's just sort of leaning over a little bit, and I couldn't figure out why it was doing that. I checked the trims in my radio, and I checked the alignment and the accelerometer calibration, and that was all fine. But nevertheless, you can see here that the average roll that the plane was holding throughout the mission was negative 13 degrees. So that's rolling to the left 13 degrees, and that's exactly what we see in the chase cam footage as well. So it's below zero here, quite convincingly the whole way. And I couldn't figure this out. And I thought, well, maybe it's the wind is just sort of tipping it over a little bit, and the plane can't quite handle the wind or something. But then if we look at this graph, we'll see that this value here, this is the attitude desired roll. So this is what the plane wants to do. And we see that this is minus 13 already. So it wants to hold this minus 13 angle. And the actual roll, oh, that's one we just saw. So the red and green are basically the same. But we can see that my radio control input is not doing anything weird. So radio control input C1, channel 1 is aileron, and average value for that is 15. So this is the yellow line, and we can see that that's on 1500 the whole way through. But nevertheless, the red and the green, which we will zoom into a little bit here, you can see that it's on about minus 13. It's really weird. I don't get it. It's not a matter of the flight controller being installed at a crooked angle in the plane, because look what happens when I switch into fly-by-wire A. You can see that all of a sudden at this point the desired roll, the red line, goes to 0. And this is my inputs here. I'm just turning the plane to come back to me. And when I let go of the stick, it goes back to desired roll of 0, and the plane flies level. So I just totally don't understand what's going on here. Anyway, moving on. What else did we have? So this is the aileron channel that's being output to the servos, and we can see that sure enough it's not at 1500, it's off at like 1555 on average, so it's intentionally rolling to the left. This is the throttle, on average about half throttle, 48%, it's pretty good, and of course it goes up slightly at the end as the battery sags. That's to be expected. And this is the track for that mission, and you can see it's sort of swinging out a little bit wide here, and especially here as well. It sort of takes a good sort of 10 seconds to come back on track until the straight part here. And if we compare this with the Wingwing later on, you'll see that the Wingwing doesn't really do that. So I think that issue with the roll being off center for some reason has something to do with the way it's swinging out here. So yeah, I'm sort of wondering if something hasn't been set up quite right, and maybe I'm not giving the Nano talon a fair chance somehow, but I just can't think what the issue would be.
Okay, so the Wingwing's been running for what feels like about 35, maybe even 40 minutes now, and the voltage on this one is still around about 13.9. Let's see if I can find it. Should be somewhere about there, but I can't see a damn thing on my screen. Alright, never mind. It's up there somewhere. But yeah, 13.94 on a straight, and in a turn, 13.6. Quickly back up to 13.9. So it's still got quite a ways to go. And I wasn't really planning on like discharging the batteries all the way down to 2.5 volts on purpose. But since that happened yesterday for the Nano talon, what I'll do is I'll keep an eye on this a bit better than I did yesterday, and when it says 9.8 I will quickly stop it at that point, so that way we know we've got an exact comparison between the two planes as to how much voltage was on the clock when we stopped the test. Okay, sort of hovering between 10.5 and 11 volts at the moment. Man, the drop between 12 volts and 10 volts is very quick. You've got to watch that. Seems to have slowed right down.
And it's also having to put up with quite a bit of wind now, which is a little bit annoying, but like because this test has run longer in the day, the wind's picked up and now it's got an extra handicap that the Nano talon didn't have. Okay, 9.8, that's the end of that. Fly-by-wire A, because I can see it. Alright, bumped straight back up to 11.4, that's good to know. So the battery, I don't think we're seriously damaging this battery by doing that, hopefully. Don't really want to land upwind, but we're going to.
Okay, let's have a look at the graphs that we got from the Wingwing run, and I've taken screenshots of all the same graphs for this. So this is the altitude. You can see that I made a little bit of a mistake. The return to launch altitude, it looks like it's set to 80 meters instead of 100, so I thought I'd got everything perfectly the same for both of these planes, but that somehow slipped by me. But I don't think it really matters. Anyway, the total time for this was 94 minutes versus the 61 of the Nano talon. Temperature is about the same. Actually, it's about 1 degree warmer for some reason inside the plane. Maybe it was the shape of the plane, or maybe it was just that this day was a bit warmer. I don't know. Current is 2 amps versus 3 amps for the Nano talon, and it's a bit closer view there. Battery voltage basically the same, except for this little bit right at the end. Because I was watching it closer, the total time that it went below 10 volts was only about 5 seconds or something like that. Wasn't very long. No, what is this? No, it's about 15 seconds, but anyway, no big deal. And again, it bounced back to 12 volts very quickly. This is the climb, which I think I calculated at 2.5 meters per second at 4 amps versus 2 meters for the Nano talon. And the sink rate, I calculated this to be 1.5 meters downwards versus 1.4. So the Nano talon seems to have a little bit better glide coming down. 20 satellites on average, or 21 on average versus 18. Not really sure why this would be any different, but I guess maybe it's just that the orbits of the satellites were in slightly different place at this time, so it was a better situation for getting more reception. The overall speed is a fair bit slower than the Nano talon, so it's 14 on average, and at the beginning of the mission it was only 15 versus 16 to 17 for the Nano talon, and at the end of the mission it was 12 versus 13 for the Nano talon. This is the I just compared this graph too, just to make sure that this is the correct value that we should see for the roll. It should be centered around 0, not negative 13. And this is the output to the servo again, so it should be right around 1500 if everything's trimmed and set up properly. This is the throttle, only 33% on average for this versus about 48 for the Nano talon. And this is the track showing that it's both following the mission more closely than the Nano talon was, and it's also following its own path a lot more closer. So all of these loops around the track are much more on top of each other. I mean, they're virtually within like 2 or 3 meters for the most part, so it's somehow managing to follow this course much tighter, even though there was a tiny bit more wind on this day. Okay, so here's an overview of the results for each plane side by side, and like I said, the Nano talon is about 100 grams heavier than the Wingwing, and you may be thinking, well, that's not fair, why don't you load them up so they're equal? But I left it like this because it's going to be a typical outcome for anybody who's trying to build one of these planes and keep the weight down. And I am using the exact same electronics gear for each plane, and the Wingwing is actually carrying a camera and the Nano talon is not. And as I mentioned at the beginning, the reason I did that was because anybody who's going to be doing this kind of a experiment or any flight like this, they're probably going to have a camera on, and they're probably not going to be able to put the camera inside the Wingwing. So to my mind, this is a fairly fair comparison of a typical outcome. Anyway, so you can see the numbers here. Flight time was 61 minutes versus 94, and the distance covered was 57 kilometers versus 68. So the Wingwing is fairly handily winning in both categories, but the interesting thing is that the average speed was much faster for the Nano talon. So it sort of reflects the 3 amps that it was using rather than as opposed to the 2 amps that the Wingwing was using. The power used, energy used, was approximately the same. Well, almost exactly the same really, because I kind of intentionally made it that way. So when we look at the time versus the power used, they're basically doesn't really change anything here. because these two numbers that we're dividing by in this bit are almost the same. But when we take the weight into account, the differences go down a little bit. So the Wingwing was able to keep about 30% more weight in the air for the same time, for the same energy, so 13 to 10 roughly. But when you look at it for distance covered and weight carried together, it's about the same. There's really nothing in it here, 9.6 to 9.7 or so. So if you just want to move a weight a certain distance, then either plane will be fine. If you want to keep one of these planes in the air for longer, then the Wingwing is your best bet. So that should give you a rough idea of what to expect from each plane, and depending on whether you're interested in time in the air or distance or speed, this should give you an idea of which one you might want to use. Now, if you watch as many YouTube videos as I do about this kind of thing, you're probably looking at the result for the Nano talon thinking, that wasn't that great. I'm sure I've seen some better results than that out there. And I was thinking that too, and I've definitely seen multiple results that were much better than that. Specifically, one that I remember distinctly was this one from Archangel RC last year. This is Nicholas' channel, and you can see his results here that I've just paused. So he is basically using the same sort of lithium-ion battery, slightly different brand, a little bit less capacity, but the important thing is how much was put back into the cells when he charged them. So 2.4 amp hours, which is a lot less than the 3.2 that I had, and he's got from that a 67 kilometer flight distance and 100 minutes. So that leaves me wondering if there's something wrong with my plane, whether I set something up wrong or the bearings in the motor are bad and they're causing a drag when the motor's trying to turn, or maybe that issue we saw with the roll being stuck on 13 degrees has something to do with it. But the theory about the motor being bad or the bearings causing a lot of drag or something like that sort of goes away when you look at somewhere around here. Where was it? Just sort of a general steady flying situation. So yeah, 1.3 amps versus the 3 amps that I had, but the speed is a lot slower. So he's doing 39, 40-ish, 43, 42, but a bit over 40 kilometers per hour, but my plane was doing on average 57 at 3 amps. It doesn't scale linearly, so it's reasonable to expect that if he was flying at 57 kilometers an hour here, he might be pulling 3 amps to do that. So I don't think there's a problem with the bearings in the motor or drag or anything like that, like the motor rubbing on something. It just seems to be the different style of flying. So he's flying manually, and he's flying fairly high, so 300 meters, he might be able to ride some thermals up there or something. And with my automated mission, it was not really trying to just sort of take it easy. It was it was just flying at the default settings. So perhaps what I could do, if I really cared about making the Nano talon look a bit better, is I could set up the parameters in ArduPilot so that it tried to do the mission at more of a slower speed, like this 40 kilometers per hour. I'm not really sure if I can be bothered doing that, because I kind of want to take that flight controller off and use it on another plane. So whether I ever do that, I'm not sure. But if I do, I'll let you know about it somehow or other, I suppose. But anyway, yeah, 100 minutes was the time that he got for that versus my 60 minutes. So it's completely different, and I'm not totally sure why. But anyway, I've talked about this for far too long already, so I'll just finish the video here. Let me know in the comments if you have any suggestions about why my result might have been so different to Nicholas. Oh, the batteries that he was using, there was one other difference. These batteries, I think he said they have a 30 amp maximum discharge rating. The ones I'm using have a 10 amp maximum discharge rating, but still the 3 amps that I was pulling is well within that range. Anyway, thanks for watching, and let me know if you have any suggestions about the discrepancy between these two results. Bye.